We have Seattle, Phoenix, Sacramento, New York. Wow. Dubai, Philippines, Mars. Of course, why not? from from everywhere. This is really great. So this is, I mean, John Lennon would have been proud. We are truly, this is actually quite an evolution, and sometimes we do take it for granted, don't we? So just to start off, let's introduce our speakers. We have Micah and Xiaodan. So Micah needs very little introduction, but nonetheless, let's go ahead and introduce him. He is the founding board member of IXDA. On top of that, he has been leading design and design teams at eBay, at Yahoo, at LinkedIn, at Medallia, Cleargraph, Skipflag, PayPal, and now Venmo. We also have Xiao Dan, who is another luminary from Silicon Valley, who has been leading design teams in a variety of different companies, from ThoughtWorks. She has been at Grab, Didi, and now director of design at Facebook. Can everyone hear me? If you cannot hear me, please say, cannot hear you. I just want to do a quick sound check here. Can everyone hear me? Just click yes in the chat if you can hear me. No, if no good. Yeah, all good? If no, just speak loud. Oh, fantastic, loud and clear. Thank you, it's what I needed. Just want to check because we're all over the world, including Mars and India and Indonesia, you know. Don't know how loud I need to speak here. All right, perfect. So maybe we could start by getting to know you a little bit better. So Xiao Dan, could you share with us maybe some of the highlights and lowlights of your professional career with us?
Absolutely. And first, I want to thank everybody for your time. And it's incredible, right, to see you have close to 200 folks on the online. Thank you for your time. Highlights and lowlights, great question. I think my highlights and lowlights are somewhat connected. It was back in 2009. Let me start with the lowlight. I had to give up my job at Microsoft. And that was the reason was that my husband's job relocated to Singapore. So I was moving from London to Singapore. Yeah, I'd love to hear if any of you had to, you know, change jobs or relocate to somewhere else in the world. Feel free to comment in the chat room, right? So I'm sure a lot of us would have something in common. So that was really challenging for me because I loved my job at Microsoft and had a great time in London with lots of friends. On the other hand, I want to follow my husband, right? So that's really difficult and really literally took me a year to adjust. And the flip side is that you never know what life brings to you, right? And so it was a hard time for me to move to Singapore. And my highlight of my career, right, was also in Singapore because back in 2015, when I first joined Grab, I had such a great opportunity to envision and build a dream team, a dream innovation hub from scratch. So the design team I had built, right, had the interaction, visual design, research, architects, service design, UX engineers, et cetera, right? So I had so many variety of disciplines, and we were able to really materialize lots of concepts. So I just really want to share that you never know what brings you in life, so just follow your heart.
Thank you, Xiaodan, for that. Yes, lowlights and highlights can be connected. Yeah, glad you made that move and followed your heart. Micah, how about you? Your highlights and lowlights of your career.
Sure. I'll just say one thing that I think connects to what we were just talking about. I spent several years in my career at LinkedIn, and one of the things you learn there, everyone, you know, we all work hard to tell our career story sort of looking backwards, but the truth when you're living it is it's not a straight line, it's a squiggly line. And that was definitely true for me as well. I grew up and started in a small village in upstate New York. We were chatting a little bit before the call about how probably other folks on the call are from villages, although not necessarily in the US. This is where I grew up. It's in Cooperstown, which is where the Baseball Hall of Fame is supposedly, or is, and where baseball is supposedly invented. After being in Cooperstown, I lived all over the country at different times. I went to college at Skidmore College, which is a small Victorian town, and then I worked for a while in Princeton, New Jersey, which is another small Victorian town. And then I ended up going to Atlanta, Georgia, which is not a small Victorian town. And I was not super happy. And so I ended up going to Pittsburgh, where I went to graduate school at Carnegie Mellon. And Pittsburgh's a big city, but it's beautiful and has a lot of very small, rich communities in it. And after that, I moved out in 2002 to the Bay Area, where I've been working in tech since then.
Nice, thank you. I think it's funny how it's the mobility of life and labor, right? Moving around cities and geographies and with that work experiences. So to move into the discussion today, we're going to talk about how great design teams influence business. And maybe a way to crack this open is to ask you that there seems to be an awakening, right, in the design industry, to be a lot more business oriented. Now, why do you think that is? Why now? And how is that playing out in your respective roles? Any one of you can just take a stab at that first.
I can go.
Sure.
You can take the next one first. So I was reflecting on this, like, I've been lucky enough to be working in product design things for about 20 years, and at least in my time doing product design, the fundamentals haven't really changed, which is, there's a recognition that the heart of what we do is about product design and engineering. Now, in the last number of years, the groups have widened so that user research and market research and content design and data analytics and data science and commercialization and customer service are all part of that triad. But fundamentally, the role of a designer is connected to impact, and they've understood it. I think what's changed in the last few years is more that we're starting to have design-founded companies, which have reached very large valuations, places like Airbnb. We've got groups like the Designer Fund, which specialize in funding design-led companies. We've got chief design officers. We've got designers in residence at a lot of the top venture capital firms. And in terms of why it's happening now, from my expectation, it's that users' expectations of their customer experiences have been going up. When a new capability comes in, just being able to do it is enough to make people really, really excited. But in this cycle of tech, it's being possible is no longer enough. Consumers and customers are expecting a great experiences, and so companies can no longer be successful, without great design. So it's becoming a mandatory part of what we do. At Venmo, the way I think it's played out, we talk about the Venmo experience and wanting to make sure that it's fundamentally fun, fast, and social. And we're expanding what you'll be able to do at Venmo beyond just sending friends money back and forth, but to help connect you to local businesses and to help make purchases and to really potentially run your business. And all of that is an experience question. So that's created the opportunity for us to build the relationships that we need to be successful and have influence in the business as well as in the user experience.
Yeah, so user expectations going up and more design-led conversations. But I mean, Shadan, what about you? Because you're right now at Facebook, and something interesting that Micah said was that being possible is enough. People expect great experiences, and expectations are going up. And you've also had experiences in Microsoft and other companies. How has that played out in your role and in your teams?
Yeah, I think this is a great question, and really absolutely agree with what Micah's sharing, right? I think fundamentally, the reason really is that technology, right, has enabled us to track performance, and we're able to do A/B testing, right, to really pinpoint the UI effectiveness. And I think this is really the foundation for the first time in history, right? Design can actually measure, the impact. So I think that's quite fundamental. I think second layer to that is lots of business are moving online, especially right now, right, during the pandemic, so that people don't really have a choice. If you don't have a good design, really, you can't really sell your product or services successfully, right? So that, again, forces people to realize the design impact in a business context. I think the third dimension really is something I can link with my personal experience, is that I feel as much as the awakening is happening, it is not a given. It is generations and many, many designers around the world working really hard to make these realizations. I feel I can give an example, right, to illustrate this process in my career. I've been working as a UX professional for about 20 years. I remember in the early days, in the very first few years, when I started at Yahoo, my first job, I did a design impact report to my general manager to show the impact that I had, right, with my work in dollar terms. I remember the comment she made was that this is the first time I see design in business terms. So that was 2003. And then fast forward a few years to 2007, I joined Microsoft and was designing for MSN portal homepage. So I was taking on this project to redesign a portal for five countries because they had issues, right, with the new design, and there was engagement regression. So I flew there and understood the user pain points, did the redesign, uplifted the click-through rate across 5 countries on average of 40%. So that was a great opportunity for the business to see that what design can bring to your business success. And as a result, I was leading the remaining 42 countries, right? And it was a big deal because MSN was ranked number 2 and number 3 in the world back then. So I think it was not really a recognition for me as an individual. It was really a recognition for design as a discipline. So I think that if you think about today, 2020, and in the world of Facebook, for example, I think the things and the dynamic has really changed. For us, the designers and cross-functional teams, right? We are really equal now. We work cross-functionally and taking the same weight in terms of product strategies and to form our business visions. So I think that is my personal journey, and I feel it's reflective, right, of the reality.
Yeah, I had a similar experience, and like I'm looking at the Slido, it looks like the truth is that not everyone's in a place where those dynamics are as aligned. And so I think some of the history of times when we were working in places where the power imbalance was not as good may be helpful to the audience. Like your story about Yahoo reminds me, again, 20 years ago when I was at eBay. And at that point, let's say the eBay design team was like 7 people, I think maybe 10. Design was perceived within the organization at that point really as a service organization, as a like, here's a bunch of stuff, marketing made stuff, product design will make stuff. It was definitely more dollars and cents driven. But we had a mighty team which believed that we could do a lot. And so like one of the questions I hear people asking about is like, how did you handle sort of trying to change that? One of the things we did was like first meeting expectations and then trying to exceed them. So like if you just run off and are like, wait, I'm going to do this strategy. Well, people will be like, that's nice, but do your job. Like I have this thing I have to get done. We had to do what was asked, but then we had to go above and beyond and say, not only that, we can think about what the strategy can be. And to do that, we had a bridge period where it meant we were doing 2 jobs and we weren't necessarily staffed to do the 2 jobs. So we worked extra hard. But by showing the value of what we could do and to help establish a bunch of strategies that led to changes in the product direction, people realized that product design was a critical part of the experience. We started to build those relationships. I can talk about some of the artifacts we made that helped in that process, but why don't we keep going?
No, that's perfect. We can definitely move on. I mean, take it up from there. So some of those artifacts, and I think going back to Xiaodan, you talked about creating a design impact report. I do see questions about how do you quantify the impact of a design? How do you demonstrate the ROI of user experience? If you could speak a little bit to that, both of you from your experience, that would be great.
Absolutely, I can address this first, right, and then pass to Micah. Yeah. I think my experience, right, is that number one is really to ask the experts, because we don't naturally all go to business school, right, to understand how those impacts are calculated. So I think ask the experts. And second, I think, is to take some part-time course or whatever classes you can take, right, relating to business or new media management. For example, my expert was my husband, actually, when I was at Yahoo, my then boyfriend. I was asking him the question because he was a finance professional. I asked him, hey, I want to represent my design value, but can you share with me how do I translate my click-through rates and conversion rates into lifetime value so I can show, how much money I actually generated to the company via my design. So he helped me to build this formula, and I was able to leverage that, right, to do that presentation I did. So I think that's one. And then I took this 9 months long part-time class called the New Media Management through the University of London. And that really taught me a lot of things about business, about management, about technical knowledge and the conceptual skills. So I think those investment, right, is definitely worth it. I'd love to hear more from.
No, that's great. I'm hearing there's no easy way out. Learn the business, learn the language. Learn.
Yeah. And the thing I'd say about that is, as you said, asking the experts is totally right. Like, this is why it depends on your organization, of course. Like, who you go to ask will be different. You may or may not have a dedicated analytics person or finance person or product person. It depends on the nature of your organization. But fundamentally, your business has to have a way that they keep score. How are they winning, right? What's the definition of success? It ultimately likely comes down to dollars and cents, but behind those dollars and cents are a set of behaviors. And if the users do these behaviors, they turn into the dollars and cents. And behind the behaviors is some core customer value. If there isn't value, then you're not going to be in business for very long. But like, if you can understand what that chain is, like, what is it? What is the value that we can create? Then you can start to be creative about understanding what we can bring to the table. I think, the superpower that we as designers have is, one of them is being able to emote really well and to try to connect and understand as well as to communicate. One of the superpowers of people who are a little bit more left brain is to be able to analyze and to understand impact, right? Like, one of the most painful experiences I had working with people who potentially are right out of school. In school, you may be given a problem or a project, at least historically, and treat it as like, oh, I'm going to make this part gorgeous or work really, really well. But if that step is step 3 and no one gets to step 3, it is irrelevant. You are putting energy into something that's not going to have an impact. So understanding how your business measures impact. An old friend of mine used to say that the job of product, and here I'm going to say big P product because it includes design, is to define the game you're playing and how you keep score. So like, what is the strategy that you're trying to go after? And what are the metrics that you use to keep score? This is something Facebook as an organization does incredibly well. They give teams a great deal of autonomy to say, okay, what are you going after? You define it based on your customer insights. How are you going to keep score? What's your metric? Okay, now we will judge you by that. You're the one who picked the goal. You're the one who picked the number. If you don't hit the number, that's not good. And that's true for everybody on the team. Everyone has a sense of ownership of those things. And that accountability is really powerful. So even if that isn't in your company's culture, if you bring it, if you say, hey, help me understand the business, help me understand how it works, and you express that curiosity, people will want to help you. And then you can bring your creativity to help do what everyone's trying to do, which is to make value for our customers, value for the business, and execute a great experience.
I think one question that follows up from there is, it's really interesting that you would just express curiosity, understand the business, and translate dollar and cents into behavior. You mentioned doing 2 jobs, designing and strategy. Don't run away from what you're actually doing and disconnect that. But let's say from a very practical perspective, PMs, and you see this question in Slido, you're not being involved in discussions. I think that comes up a lot. Like, they didn't invite me to the meeting, right? They only included me at the last minute. And what would you say to everyone out there about how they can step into that culture? It's a cultural mindset, right? And shift that. What are some small steps, these actionable tips that we could apply?
Do you want to go first?
Yeah, sure, I can go first. This is a great question, and I think it's a common pain point for designers, right? And I think the key thing really is to embrace and to include, right? Meaning that, hey, while others may not include you, you can include them. You need to flip the card, right? And the very common thing we do as designers is that we are usually very good at running design sprints or collaborative workshops. And that is something, it's a given for us, but it's not a given for many, many other functions, right? And everybody has different walk of life. You don't always come into right after universities know how to run a workshop collaboratively. So I would say really anchor on this, because you have to change the process of how things are done to get yourself involved. And the objective is not about getting design involved in the strategy or vision discussions, is to get everyone in those discussions, because everybody has their perspectives and we can strengthen each other's thinking, right, by doing things together. So I think what you can do, right, really is just to reach out to your product counterparts or even engineer counterparts, right, to have a heart-to-heart conversations to say that, hey, you know, I really like to be involved in these discussions, right, or in the visionings. Sometimes it's just a matter of telling people what you want, because nobody can read your minds and everybody has, you know, their known way of working. That in my way, maybe I never work with designers, so I don't know what you want and how you can contribute. So go first, tell them that I want to be involved. And then second, I would say, you know, bring some design thinking methodologies or processes onto the table to show your partners, right, what I can bring to the table that would add value to that process. So for example, right, like, you know, we can do, what I usually do, share with my partner is that, hey, I have this mini presentation about what is this process about, because sometimes people need to see it, right, instead of you telling them. So I usually run through a deck, a small deck I built, and to show them that, hey, we can work on the vision strategy together, we can do the competitor analysis together, we can understand the user together, we can design together, we can build the user stories, this and that, right? You talk about the end-to-end process with them, and then tell them that I can help you with your next project, let's do it together. So I think this is the baby step, right, to make. Yeah.
Totally agree. I think like the nature of how you get there is different in different cultures and of different companies. There's a great book about the speed of trust, about the power. If you have trust in your relationship, how much more you can do. Sometimes you're starting from a place where you don't have that trust, and so like, how do you build it? My suggestion, and I watched some folks I really admire do this at the beginning of my career, is like, just start by trying to add value. Like an example, this was again 20 years ago at eBay. My friend Luke Wroblewski went off, and he was one of the first designers invited into some conversations about strategy, where we were looking at international competitors. You know, the team had these collections of screenshots from all these international competitors. Well, very few of them were in English. So he spent the night from the kickoff meeting to the follow-up the next day, painstakingly going through and translating all of the mock-ups into English and putting them into, at that point, Photoshop. This was grunt work, and no one asked him to do it, but he created a tremendous amount of value. Like the conversation was much more productive because he did that than it was prior to that. And that helped. The impression that people had was, oh, this guy really is helpful. And then he started to contribute more in conceptual work of like, well, you know, that's an interesting way to frame the problem. Have you considered da 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 da? And they're like, wow, he's got great ideas also. And so it built this bridge of trust. And it started by, you know, creating value or adding value, and then secondly, becoming essential, like creating enough value that people are like, oh my God, I couldn't do this work without you. And the other advantage, or the other suggestion I would have, and this is exactly the story we just heard, is like, use your superpowers. You may not be an expert in finance, but you can probably express the data in some way that is better than the people who are experts in collecting the data can. Or you can help them tell a story of what they're trying to achieve. I can give two quick examples of that. One was from a long time ago, where we were doing some work looking at the registration process. And this was back early enough that, believe it or not, it wasn't common to look at things as funnels and to look at things as growth graphs. They're like, oh, the numbers are going up every quarter, it's fine. And so we looked at how do we bring all of the data that we know in. We looked at the behavioral data, we looked at the customer support data, we looked at usability data. We brought all of that data in, we put it into a single visualization of the experience. And we talked about, okay, this is, yes, the numbers are going up, but look at the drop off that's happening. And look at what people are telling us the problem is. And that helped frame the problem and opportunity. And we leveraged our superpower to create a story that no one else could individually. And it was, again, not about design, it was about the team that was working on this that was able to create these insights that then helped us figure out the right solution. The other more recent example was when I joined the Venmo team, we also had a new head of the business, and he had some great ideas about how he wanted to frame our strategic goals and what we were going after. And I again volunteered. I'm like, how can I help? I'd love to assist. And so I got a copy of the deck that he was preparing to present to the all hands, and I was like, these are good ideas, but not wonderfully told as a story. We can do so much more. And so we spent a lot of energy to express the brand and to bring the data into a more visual storytelling way and to work on the narrative. And I was the tip of the spear, but then I brought in marketing design, and I brought in content design, and I brought in the data science team, and we were able to sort of help support and create that cross-functional conversation. So you have to just start from where you are, and it's not about is it perfect, but it is tomorrow better than it was yesterday.
That's really good stuff. I mean, essentially, start by offering value, and then someone asks, well, what is that value? And you have to find what that is. As a designer, there's a whole cocktail of ways that you can contribute. What is that, and what makes sense in this context? And start expanding, snowballing on that, right? On that contribution. I'm curious to hear from you. Speaking of the impact of design on business, you've had a lot of experience. I'm sure you've experienced missed opportunities where design could have been more in dialogue with business, or could have influenced it better, but it didn't work out quite the way you expected. What happened? What was the outcome? And what did you learn? I mean, switch away from
many, too many. You want to start, Mike?
Sure, I can do one. So leaders need to be vulnerable. So I am happy to share a time I was not successful. I've worked at a number of places. In addition, I actually spent time at Facebook working on the profile team there. And I want to tell the story of the very first design sprint I ran with that team. So I've worked at a bunch of different companies. I'm confident I know how to do these sprints. It's no problem. But what I didn't do a good enough job in was recognizing, and you're joining a new team, it's really important to make sure you understand the culture of the team. And even if you ask, the problem with culture is it's the thing that is in the water that people can't even tell you because it's just how things are. And so it's hard to communicate through any means other than osmosis. And so the way that I was used to running sprints included like starting with a large group which may have themes and ideating and diverging and then converging and then forming a smaller group which would ideate and express those ideas in a concrete way and then bring them back to the larger group. And I've used that process in a number of ways, but what I didn't know is in the culture of that team, they had an expectation that everyone was in all the steps all the way through, and it was a 40+ person group of people. And so the sprint started diverging and diverging and diverging, and it was really tough to converge when you have 40 people in the room trying to do that in like a 2-day period. The thing I learned from this was, and again, with hindsight, there's other ways we could have handled it. Well, we could have done breakout sessions and done it in different ways, but I didn't know the culture of the team and the importance of bringing everybody through all of the steps rather than the front, bringing it down, summarizing it, working on it. Now, I don't know that that's the best model, but what's most important is what matters to the team and recognizing the cultures and values of the team and doing those things well. So that was one learning I had.
Thank you. Yeah, that's very, very relatable, I think, especially as people work in all types of companies, different sizes. And when you join a new company as well, I think a lot of us who join new companies, how do you get started and adapt what you have to where you are? I love the osmosis example, fish and water. You can't communicate culture, right? You kind of absorb it. Xiaodan, how about you? A missed opportunity that you have to share?
Absolutely, and thank you so much, Micah, for your sharing, because that resonates a lot with me, right? This culture thing is highly sensitive and it just takes time, right, to absorb. I think for me, right, I have a very specific example where, I can't share in a lot of details, because I want to keep the confidentialities, right? But I want to share the essence of it and to say it more broadly. So there was an instance where we did miss a business opportunity, and the very reason was because that we are dealing with a highly complex product, yet our prototype did not reflect the complexities of the interactions, right? That's happening on the platform. Because where our prototype was a little bit oversimplified, the actual user flow, so that we didn't get a concrete or accurate read, right, from the usability testing. Therefore, we had the wrong recommendation, basically, right? And we did not identify the actual problem. So that was really resulted in the business regression when we're doing the testing. And so that was one example where we did have an opportunity, right, to improve the business, and we missed it. But I think what was the outcome and what was the things we learned was really, I want to give the praise to the team. It was a super resilient and hardworking team. As the moment we find out, hey, something's wrong, we all jumped in to try to solve the problems. The data scientists try to pinpoint, hey, where is it wrong from a data's perspective? And the designers immediately, right, re-prototyped a super high fidelity model and to try to test that, and the research jumped in, right, try to reevaluate the research findings, etc. So I think the key thing we learned is, number one, that when you are dealing with very complex interactions or interface, make sure your prototype mimic the real experience as much as you can. And that is one reason when I was at Grab, we had UX engineers, because some highly complex product interface, you need to actually code it to have that real experience, like search, for example, like a map, for example, right? You can't, there's no shortcut. There is just hard work you have to go through. And the second learning is, don't bundle too many changes in one go, because when you launch something, right, there's too many changes. If something goes wrong, you actually don't know what's wrong. So the biggest learning of that experience is really break down of all the things you want to build and release them one by one. So give some time so that you can actually really pinpoint which part is not working. So that's the learning we have.
One quick comment on that one, because I know that lesson and have lived it. One thing that I think experienced designers do well, that sometimes you need to work with your product folks to get, is it is critically important, as you say, to control the release, because you don't know what part's going to change what, but it's really helpful to know where you want to go, right? To have a concept car, a vision of where you're trying to point at, and you may change that as you go. But if you're only doing incrementality without a vision of where you're going, it's hard. It's less likely you're going to get to a big place. But I totally agree. It's very important to control the changes so you know if you were successful.
Absolutely. And I think that's exactly the right point, right? Because that's why we need to have those collaborative design vision or business vision workshops, right? To have that big picture, then you break it down, right? And to do it realistically. So I think it's just really left hand, right hand, right? It has to be both working. Yeah, great point.
Have you experienced a situation where there was an impasse between business objectives and what the design has uncovered? I see a question from Carmen. Thank you very much for your question. When business objectives are not aligned with what the design team has uncovered, I'm sure this happens a lot where you're like at this point and you're trying to negotiate. How do you get around these impasses from an experience you've had?
Shall I just go ahead?
Go ahead. Go ahead.
All right. So I think there are a couple of ways, right? And most straightforward method, right, I usually use is really rely on research. If business tell you one thing and you disagree, then let's validate, right? Validate the hypothesis. And that usually lands to a more objective and informed decision. But sometimes really is to unpack the business objectives when it gets more complicated. For example, I have an example, right, that we need to design, our business objective is to enable users to finish their workflow as fast as possible. That was the initial business objective. It makes sense, right? From A to B, you want the users to go quickly. But then when the designers come into play and they look at the end-to-end flow, and the question is that based on our user understanding, they don't always want to finish job from A to B, because they have a planning stage to do something, to prepare for the job. And sometimes they need sign off from their managers or from other teams so they can actually proceed. So it's not a linear journey. So when we identify that, right, our question is that, hey, this metrics make sense, but you also need a counter metrics, meaning that while we enable the users to finish the job from A to B smoothly, if they don't want to do that, they should be able to easily do so. So that is the counter metrics, right, to evaluate. So I think that's where, you know, designers, I mean, not just designers, right, anyone, any function can kick in, right, to challenge each other's assumptions or business objectives.
Yeah, totally agree. I think it, as you say, it comes down to, like, I think there are several different kinds of breakdowns that can happen. One, as you say, is if there is disagreement about, the example you just gave is one where there may have been disagreement about the relative value of that metric. And we need to look at, well, it's not the be all end all. Maybe that's all we've looked at historically, but we have to look at the broader context. And so, as you say, you know, the metrics are going to tell you what's happening, but not necessarily why. And so being able to go from the quantitative to the qualitative and the field work to understand what's going on. And again, sometimes organizations don't have big research arms, but still, you can always go talk to your users, or you can hopefully all go talk to your users. Because as long as you can get alignment and agreement on the problem, on the customer problem, and on the business value you're trying to deliver, then it's more like a puzzle piece of, okay, what's the most efficient way to put these things together? And what are the considerations we need to go against it? Like, the advice I'd give is, like, if you find yourself in a position where you are in conflict with another partner, is there a way that you can upframe the conversation so that you can get to a place of agreement of what the goals are? Because if you can get to the place of agreement of goals, then you can start to be creative about other ways that you can try to solve it.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think one thing that I like to think about, or I say even, is, look, your goals are my goals. My goals are to help you achieve your goals. We're on the same team here, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm not meant to be a blocker. I'm not trying to be antagonistic, right? So as long as we agree on the goals, then it's about how we approach it, right? And then that becomes about the best way to get there.
Yeah, and in a lot of cases, I won't say all, but in most cases, everyone across the team wants to do the right thing. They've got objectives and things that they're trying to do, but everyone wants to do what's right. And so if you can get evidence about what's right that either confirms or disproves your hypothesis, it's easier to get alignment on those things. Now, that depends also on having an organization that is fundamentally data-driven and open to hypothesis. Sometimes you're working in a company that's sort of cult of personality, right? Like, I believe this, you shall all go do that. So for that, you need different techniques, but empathy is always a great place to start.
I think we have quite a number of people here, and maybe in the chat you could holler if that's you, who are from smaller companies or companies that you think maybe more dev oriented or personality oriented, not as design oriented. How would you, so I think then it becomes more of an effort on that front, right? Using data and evidence to have that conversation. What advice would you give there?
You know, one piece of advice, which is something I try to do, whether it was I was an IC or as a manager entering a new environment, is, you know, first you need to manage your inputs and your outputs, right? Like, the way that we stay sane is to understand what people are asking of you, to make sure that it's not more that you can do, to be clear on what the goal is. And then on the output side, like, to have alignment with your engineering partners about, like, okay, this is, I know you need everything yesterday, but, like, this is what I'm going to deliver first. And then I will deliver this. And, like, can we work together to find a way to deliver this incrementally so that you're not blocked? And for the designers to be close enough to the developers to, again, to develop that empathy, to understand, like, oh, the poor developer has, you know, 40 tickets they're trying to work through in Jira. I'm going to try to create some sanity from that and, you know, make a picture of what the world should be, and then we can incrementally work towards creating it. So, you know, I think creating that allyship at the ideation phase, whether that's with a product manager or a development manager or a business or CEO, is one piece. And the second allyship that's really important is with the developer, because it's the person who has hands on keyboard that actually determines what your experience is. So, building that relationship with them and finding people who take a great deal of pride in what they make and who care deeply about who customers are, they'll be really interested in hearing what you learn too. Like, everyone wants to understand what the problem is, because then we can all contribute our own point of view about what the solution could be.
Yeah.
Totally agree. Totally agree. Yeah, I'm just chiming in a little bit. I think one thing in terms of building empathy, it really is to, one thing that always works, right, is to bring developers or PMs or your senior leadership into the research sessions so that they can see firsthand what is the problem, right? And that level of empathy really needs to be built, right, in front of your own eyes. It's not so much about, hey, I tell you so, right? And I think another thing really resonates with me, what Micah shared, is to be friends, right, with your cross-functional partners, with your engineers. At the same time, to tell them what you want. Meaning that, for example, when I was in one of the teams I worked for, right, in one of the companies, the front-end developers, the whatever they came up with, right, it's just far from what the design was. It's just like, black and white. So I was a little bit disappointed, but I didn't say it, right? I just sit next to the developer to show him that, hey, here's the design, here's what your front end result is, right? You can see that this button is different size, the padding is different, the typography is different, even the color is not exactly the same, right? Can we change those? So break it down of what is wrong. Don't tell people, hey, everything's wrong, then where do I start, right? So be very tangible and specific so that people can actually take your feedback. And I remember with this developer, after twice I gave him this specific feedback, he had no problem at all. It was identical to the design because he actually understands what is this designer is asking me to do. So I think that's helpful too.
Yeah, I totally agree.
Yeah, what I'm hearing a lot here is really creating allyship, friendship, and empathy as a way to assert influence. When we talk about influence, people think power and business knowledge is one thing, knowing the language, but it's like knowing your customer, knowing your collaborators, right? I'm curious to hear, because you talked about evidence-driven and data-driven decision-making to help bring alignment. Do you have examples of how you've used design or data to inform the design? I know you can't go into very concrete details, everyone's working on secret projects everywhere, but maybe from the past or present, any example, how does one use data to inform design?
Sure. When I first heard this question, I was chatting with my wife, who's also a design leader, and she joked, she's like, what project don't we use the data for design? Like, it is at the heart of sort of all the things that you do, whether it's to understand the problem or to evaluate possible solutions, and then to learn what you need to make better. And there's lots of kinds of data. It doesn't only have to be like what you get out of Google Analytics or your custom tool. There's, as we said, there's user research data, there's market research data, there's customer service data, et cetera, et cetera. One of the examples that struck me when I was thinking about this was some work that someone who last summer was a design intern at Venmo, her name was Lisa, did. She took on a project which came into existence because of data. We looked at our customer service calls, and what we determined was that the number one driver, the number one reason people were calling Venmo at the time was people had a problem that they were sending money to the wrong user. And so we gave Lisa sort of the opportunity to spend a summer trying to understand the problem and what was causing it and what we could do about it. And so then we used other data to analyze the funnel and be like, okay, well, where is this mistake happening and what are the precursors of it and what can we learn about what's going on? And that gave us a bunch of insights about how some limitations in our search experience, or the fact that people were zooming through very quickly and sending money to people that they'd never sent money to before, and that there was an opportunity to have different experiences for someone you've sent money to 20 times and someone you've never sent money to. And if you've never sent money, well, you should slow down and be confident that this is the right person, and that we could at least optionally introduce some more friction to say, hey, do you want to send this person a note, or do you want to get a code from them to make sure that this is the right person? You know, we were able to release those designs and put them out. And like about a month or so later, there was a tornado in South Carolina. Let's see, you can see that background, yeah. And someone's house was destroyed. And you know, people use Venmo to help each other. And so this person put their Venmo handle on their roof, including their last 4 digits of their code to make sure it was going to the right person. And so you know, this was, I thought, a beautiful example of like how this thing that started with his customer support data turned into a thing that got out into the world that really helped address this problem in someone's life in a great way. So that was a fun example.
No, yeah, that's illuminating, actually. Basically, being a Sherlock Holmes into a problem and burrowing down and figuring out, maybe we add more friction and testing that out, right? Xiaodan, what about you? Do you have any interesting examples to share?
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you, Micah, for sharing that. It is super inspiring. And yeah, as you said, right, that there is not a single decision that we make without using data, and it's almost unimaginable, right? Without when I say data, right, it's not just quantitative data, but also qualitative from research insights perspective. So those are all the data input sources. One example I can give, right, was years ago, right, when I was at Grab, we want to introduce this new feature, the peak hour pricing. Meaning that, hey, because we need to make sure that during the peak hour, when there's high demand, we need to reallocate our cars, right? So that so people whoever pays more can get the benefit. But obviously, this is not a desirable thing to do for our passengers. So we want to make sure that there are two objectives, right? One is that we want to make sure this price increase is noticeable. People are aware of it, right? They don't book by mistake. And I think the second thing is that it needs to drive the awareness, but it should not be intimidating so that people stop booking. And so you want to find that fine balance, right, between your business needs and users' needs. So we want to find the right color to do this notification. And obviously, color, everybody can see color. It's highly subjective. Everybody has an opinion. So our PM said, hey, pink, go with pink, super obvious. And our designers know it's just too cheap, this color, right? Like we want something subtle. We're designers, you know, we have taste, we want something subtle. So we did lots of testing. And obviously the subtle ones that was not noticed. The pink ones got noticed, but the numbers showed that there's also a huge job in terms of conversion rate, that the people don't book, that they saw it, therefore they don't book because they're scared. And then we also tested orange among many, many other colors, right? So what we noticed, the interesting fact was that orange gives equal awareness, but the conversion rate was higher. So that is less intimidating of a color. And that's where we landed, right? So this is a very, very small example, but I just want to illustrate that, you know, every single decision, you know, you can be backed up by data and to make it more business effective.
Right, yeah. So it's not just about what's your favorite color and the personality-driven organization, as you mentioned, yes, with the hippo in the room. Exactly. So I think there's, I mean, based on what you've been saying recently about, I mean, of course, data should and does inform every decision, ideally, and it helps bring alignments. You've talked about creating reports or articulating design in terms of business and dollars and cents. I think there's a lot of curiosity in the audience about what exactly are these insights, Xiaodan, in that design impact report that you mentioned. And maybe as well to Micah, like how do you actually quantify impact of a designer research action for an individual designer or team when you're the one, especially I guess when it's a collaborative effort, right? So I'll just throw these out there for us to banter with.
Sure. Yeah, you want to go ahead or?
Sure. Yeah. The main what hit me when you asked the question about, you know, well, how do we quantify what the metrics are and the impact of a particular designer? I speak from a lucky position in the sense that I'm in an organization where data is it's not hard to get data. I've been in many organizations where it was extremely hard to get data, but that isn't the challenge as much. There are some design decisions that are more global and are harder to figure out how they lock down, and that speaks to the earlier point of like, you need to do things more incrementally so you can see what the impacts are. But the broader point I thought of when you asked that question was, in many ways, that's not the hard problem. I think like the hard problem, like most design problems, are actually strategy problems or interpersonal problems or cultural problems. That's the root of the things that are really hard. And so figuring out how you get to those to build the trust and the relationship and the expression of what the world can be. When you have that, people can rally around it. If you're only in the data, sometimes there's this back and forth, and you're all working really hard, but you're not actually getting anywhere because you're just pushing against each other. You know, and this again is where I think design can bring a superpower. You know, a shout out to Twisha, who's on this call and is on my team at Venmo, for some of the work around the credit card, which we just put out. There were a variety of points where she helped express a vision of what we could do, and the team got excited about it. And what we discovered was the effort to get to alignment was much harder than the work to actually build the thing. Like once you know what you're doing, it happened incredibly quickly. So figuring out how to build those relationships and doing so in a way that is clear that you understand what the business is trying to achieve, that's where the metrics come in, but that you can paint a vision of what you can potentially, what the experience could be, that's where the magic can happen.
That's really nicely put. And I think, I mean, what I'm hearing as well is don't just get tangled up in the data and numbers. Like designers, you have a superpower that transcends that even, right?
Yes. But if you don't acknowledge the numbers and show how your vision connects to the numbers, then you're just floating in space and not connected to the organization. So you got to figure out the two.
Absolutely. I think, yeah, I just want to ladder that, right? It really is this holistic journey we all need to go through, right? It's not one thing that is most impactful. It's many things together to break it up, to unpack it. I think the key thing as a designer to be successful, right? Leveraging data and to be successful as a designer in your job, in your day-to-day job, really is first, you need to understand what is the problem you're trying to solve. And to understand the problems, obviously you need to rely on data, right? Research and the number, metrics, etc., to have a holistic picture so that you can accurately evaluate what is the problem or what is the opportunity. And then based on that, you really need to make sure that your solution is tackling the problem, is not a way around it, right? And not solving it. So then what you need to do is you need to validate your solution, right? Through research or whatever. And that with that, after you release your product, you look at the data, you should see a tangible improvement, right? Because you validated that hypothesis during the usability study phase. But what I think is for a designer to train yourself to be able to measure your own work, you really need to first train yourself to have a habit of looking at data. I remember in my career, earliest stage of my career, every Monday, the first thing we would do is to sit as a team, look at the data dashboard to see what is working, what is not working, which part is not working, and really, really go to granular details, right? And you know, that dashboard could be anything, could be performance data, could be uptime data, could be experiential data, could be click-through rate, and could be conversion, could be many things, time span, etc., right? So you evaluate, you slice and dice your performance in so many ways. And you need to really train yourself to be super sensitive to it and to be able to interpret. Because sometimes you see the data, you don't know what it means, and it can be interpreted in many ways, right? So work with your data scientist, work with your business analyst, right? Whoever in your team had a better sense of data, and ask them how they evaluate it, right? To really learn from the experts around you. And then you can really look at your own design. Hey, this button, I've just changed the color, had a better number than yesterday. Okay, that's how you evaluate it, right? My click-through rate increased 6% because I changed it from yellow to orange, for example, right? I'm simplifying it, but that's how you do it, right? You have to make baby steps and wanting to learn.
It was really well put. Thank you very much. To maybe we have to wrap up pretty soon because we are at top of the hour at 11:30. That went really fast, unbelievable. But there is a question. We talked about business acumen and not being able to run away from that. There is a question: what books or resources do you recommend? I know Xiaodan, you mentioned actually taking a course and speaking to your then boyfriend or just asking the experts. But what do you recommend? Do you have any top of the mind resources that you have in your mind?
Well, I mean, one that is at the intersection of data and design is the series by Edward Tufte. So there's a series of books that Edward Tufte has written. The first one's called The Visual Display of Quantitative Information. And it's like the basics of how to make a chart and how to do it well and what a crummy chart is and why. So it's the theory of how to visually present information. What's kind of funny, if you look at the series of books, the first one is like this super statistics nerd who talks about how to make a chart and do it well. And if you're into those things, and I am, it's exciting. But as he goes forward, he's got about, I think, 4 or 5 books in the series now. By the end, he gets more and more expressive forms of expressing data in insights. So they become these wonderful examples of beautiful data visualizations, Napoleon's March, weather system analysis, all kinds of things. That's a fun one because it's at the intersection of design and data. But actually, one that's kind of interesting for design managers, that's off the beaten path, is called The Goal. It's called The Goal, the Process of Continual Improvement. And it tells the story of a plant manager who is running a plant that is not doing very well. And it's literally told, if you get the audiobook, which I recommend because I like audiobooks, it's almost done as a radio play. And it tells the story of him saving the plant. And it's fundamentally about understanding impact, that like you have to figure out like where are the bottlenecks in your system, and then how do you optimize around those bottlenecks. And there's a lot of metaphors for this in what we do. There's metaphors of like, you can think about a user flow as a bottleneck, and like, where is the bottleneck and how do I deal with it? You can think about your own design team and like, you've got lots of stuff coming in, and like we're a factory that consumes coffee and outputs beautiful design. Like, where's the bottleneck in the system there? So that's a fun one to think about impact.
Thank you. Those sound like 2 really great books and resources.
I want to share something, not on the book front, right? Because thanks, Micah, for covering that. I think it's what I find really beneficial for me personally was really to get into one is the classes I mentioned. Please feel free to search for the different type of EMBAs or this kind of business management courses. It doesn't have to be a degree or super heavy, right? Something part-time, something online, whatever the format, it doesn't matter, right? But it is really the essence of the business language, business terms, and what does EBITDA mean? What does profitability mean? What is the retention? What is acquisition, right? Like, what are those business terms actually mean is something you learn from those courses, right? Another thing I found really useful was this process called Inception Workshop. I picked it up from ThoughtWorks. Feel free to go and search ThoughtWorks Inception Workshop, or any other design thinking workshop probably covers something similar. What I find really interesting was the actual exercises, right? That included in those workshops, it forces you to think as a business person. For example, if I ask you, hey, you have to develop a business vision, and that flow could be, hey, as a user, what do you want to do and what's the result you're going to achieve? Then that forces you to think, who am I targeting? What is the product and services I'm offering? And what is the business result I'm driving? And so that forces you to think in this way. And if you think about, hey, another exercise could be risk analysis, right? So what is the risks and what are the dependencies? What are the issues, for example? So you have to think in the business sense, hey, what is the risk? Maybe the team will quit tomorrow. That is the risk, right? And what is the issue? And the issue is something already existing. A risk, something will happen. An issue, to give you a good example, is that maybe today someone is, well, that's probably not a good example. So just identify what problems you have, right, today, and to see what is your mitigation plan for it. So I think, again, those exercises, right, really put you in the mindset of someone thinking business, thinking about impact upfront. So those things I find very helpful.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that's a really great combination of resources. I see the audience is extremely inspired and ignited by learning more about business and upframing and upskilling in this space as well. We will round it up now. I think we could go on forever. This has been illuminating. Thank you so much, Xiaodan and Micah, for your time and really being so open and vulnerable and just sharing really from your experiences what the rest of us can learn from. Highly appreciate it. There were other questions on culture and managers, but I think that's a part 2 we'll have to think about another time. We had to focus on this angle. But thank you so much. Do you have any last words you want to share? Like any takeaways? If you had one thing that you want everyone to remember, what would that be? Although we're going to remember a lot of things, don't worry. But if there's just one thing.
Micah, please.
Oh, sure. So I think the main thing I want you to remember is that if you want to be effective, you need to have influence. In order to have influence, you need to build relationships. And the best way to build relationships is to start by adding value and meet expectations and then exceed them. The last piece I'll just say is to recognize, like, most of us, not all of us, but many of us make digital products. And the digital products we make have a pretty darn short shelf life. Like, we work very hard on them, but they often don't exist in the world for very long because we're always learning and we're always evolving them. The t-shirt that you may get when your product launches will probably last longer than the product itself. But what endures is the people you worked with and the relationships you had, and what they'll remember about you is how you made them feel. And I think about this because I'm like, I see some people who are on the chat who I worked with at prior companies, and that's seeing them is it's how I feel. It's not about the projects. It was about the relationships that we built. So my guidance to folks is to remember that everyone you meet, whether you're fighting with your PM or your engineer, that everyone is fighting a battle that you don't know anything about. So be curious and be kind.
That's very profound. I hope you've got that written down somewhere. Xiaodan, what's your one thing you'd like to leave us with?
Cool. That's really well said, Micah. Couldn't agree more. And I have my teams from previous companies, many previous companies, current companies, right? Just something, when you see people, you have that warm feeling. It's all that matters, right? I think I want to also thank you, Nazish, for your wonderful facilitations, right? It was such a pleasure, throughout this evening. And thank you, everybody, at one point, I think 220 people, right? And just thank you, everybody, for staying for so long and listening to us. Really, really appreciate it. I think there's one thing beyond what Micah shared, right? I resonate very much. Another perspective I want to share is really stay true to yourself and stay curious. Because I think in this world, technology changes all the time. I was talking to a friend of mine the other day, and he said, hey, he's an engineer. He said, this new coding language showed up. Right? I didn't even know. I said, me too. There are lots of things showed up. I didn't even know. How come it's a trend now? I need to Google it, what it is, so I don't embarrass myself, right? And, but I found that there is no way for us to keep up with all these changing trends, changing technologies, changing softwares. But there is one thing that remains unchanged is that people don't change. And I think we really need to be super, super curious. As I think that's my secret power in a way that when I go to a design review, for example, or when I evaluate a product, it really is not because I'm an expert or I know more. It's just, I always put myself as the user who sees this the first time that, hey, can I use it? Is it difficult? And where I got confused, I would assume that, hey, that could confuse other people too. Right? So it's really just put yourself at that very first kind of curious, unknown, know that you don't know, kind of a child, with that level of curiosities, right? Looking at this world, looking at your product, and always remain, and know that, hey, you don't have to know everything, but acknowledge